The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
On tonight's In the Loop, Illinois colleges in trouble. We continue to follow the human impact of the dysfunction in Springfield. Is it causing lasting damage to state universities and colleges?
When legislators are unable to pass a budget that is beneficial for these students, that ensures their success in the future, that's not fair to them.
The Obama legacy unfolds. The former president and first lady unveiled designs of the new presidential library and museum. How will Chicago benefit?
It's not just a building, it's not just a park, but hopefully this ends up being a hub around which all of us can see a brighter future for the South Side.
And thinking inside the box. How a Chicago company turns old shipping containers into new construction. Will that spark a trend in the city?
This is kind of cool because you could take this thing and make it into something, just really aesthetically appealing.
Join us now for these stories and much more tonight on In the Loop. Good evening. I'm Chris Bury. All across Illinois, state universities and colleges are slashing salaries, cutting staff, eliminating programs, and hiking tuition. Public universities here are in crisis because Illinois Governor Rauner and state legislators led by Assembly Speaker Madigan have failed to pass a budget for nearly 2 years. That failure to govern in Springfield is having a dramatic and discouraging impact on higher education, and the fallout could hurt Illinois colleges and universities for years to come.
Sunshine, my only sunshine.
Lydia Snow loves music and teaching. For 11 years, she has combined those passions by teaching music at Northeastern Illinois University on Chicago's North Side. But Snow says doing what she most enjoys has become more challenging since her salary was cut nearly in half because of the state budget crisis.
I'm being paid about 40% of what I was paid for the exact same classes a year ago.
Northeastern Illinois University has cut teacher salaries and even some programs just to stay open in the face of a $17 million budget deficit. The university is among 12 public universities that have not received full funding as a result of the stalemate in Springfield.
The idea of self-governance is in the first.
Tony Arnold is the Illinois politics reporter for WBEZ Radio.
They still seem very far apart in terms of the core issues that are holding up the budget process, which are the same things that have been there since the beginning. Freezing property taxes, workers' compensation changes, term limits for lawmakers, changing how the legislative districts are drawn.
The raging political battle has left public universities with only partial state funding for nearly 2 years. As a result, state colleges across Illinois have laid off or furloughed hundreds of employees and cut dozens of academic programs.
Northeastern Illinois University in Chicago has done furlough days. Each university is doing its own thing to try to get creative and avoid layoffs, avoid harm to students' educations, but there's still a lot of uncertainty.
The impact has been particularly severe at the state's smaller regional universities that serve as affordable alternatives for minority and low-income students. That includes Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Western Illinois University in Macomb, Eastern Illinois University in Charleston, and Governor's State in University Park, where Elaine Maimon is the president.
With 2 years with a 70% cut in our appropriations last year and a 50% cut in our appropriations for the year that we're in, we've had to draw on that savings account and on those reserves to meet payroll.
Maimon says those drastic cuts in funding have forced the university to eliminate 35 programs and raise tuition by 15%.
The pressures that we're being put under force us to make decisions in a way that we shouldn't be forced to make.
The pressure is even stronger for administrators as they struggle to attract more students, even as enrollment keeps dropping. Last fall, undergraduate enrollment at Illinois public universities dropped 2%. Chicago State University had the highest decrease, 24%. Eastern Illinois reported a 14% drop, and Northern Illinois University reported a decrease of 5%. Christine Wang is a junior at NIU. She has noticed the difference on campus.
The campus feels a lot more empty. It's not as bustling as it was my freshman year.
Wang is the speaker of the Student Senate at NIU.
What is your way of putting together revenue?
She was one of 4 students from regional universities to participate in a discussion with legislators at Governors State University last month. In spite of protests by students and instructors in Springfield, Illinois' political leaders are no closer to a deal, and that deadlock is making it difficult for public universities to borrow money. Last month, the rating agency, Standard & Poor's, lowered the credit scores of 5 state universities to junk bond status, and others face the same threat.
It means that their bond ratings are just really bad. And what that means is that they're going to have a harder time borrowing to keep afloat, to have low interest rates on what they do borrow.
Experts caution even if the state approves a temporary or full budget, it could take universities years to recover. Barbara Gelman-Danley is the president of the Higher Education Commission.
Higher education is the economic engine for Illinois. There have been many studies over the course of the years about the impact on the economy from colleges and universities. If our colleges and universities do not do well, we are impacting the local communities and other areas in the state where they exist.
Meanwhile, students, instructors, and administrators hope legislators will see the impact their budget stalemate is having on Illinois universities before it is too late.
When legislators are unable to pass a budget that is beneficial for these students, that ensures their success in the future, that's not fair to them.
There has to be an investment in education, public education, and that needs to come from the government.
We are the institutions that create an educated citizenry and that make society better, that make the state better.
The Illinois House has passed a bill providing some temporary funding to public universities, but it has yet to clear the Senate, and Governor Rauner says he won't support another partial funding bill. Joining us now are Todd Belcourt, Executive Director for Social Change, Jimmy Lee, President and CEO of Good City, and Carrie Lester, columnist for the Daily Herald, and welcome, everyone. So, Todd, let me begin with you. We see declining enrollments, slashing salaries. Is Illinois public education, higher education, in a crisis right now?
Absolutely. I don't know how else you can categorize it. As 33 other states are raising the amount of money they put into higher ed, Illinois is an 80% reduction. As you just heard in that segment, students are feeling the burden, and it's not right for us to ask them to pay more and be in institutions that have fewer services and opportunities to offer. And that's why a lot of students are leaving. And that's why you've got an issue where you've got over 45,000 students, because of the inability to fund MAP grants and the like, who are forced to either not attend higher education or attend school elsewhere. And that's something that not just damages our present, but damages our future.
And Jimmy, with 40,000, some leaving Illinois, does that put higher education here on a downward spiral?
It does. I think in some ways, the solution is we all have to look at alternative ideas to fund some of these schools and educational institutions. For me, I feel like we can't depend on the governor and the speaker to come up with a solution, because Springfield isn't at this point ready to do it or incapable of doing it. And so in some ways we have to take matters into our own hands for the sake of the future of the state as well too.
And Carrie, what about the long-term impact on kind of the brand that we have for Illinois colleges here and universities?
It's devastating, Chris. I was reading a study the other day that talked about 66% of jobs in Illinois in the next 10 years will come from college graduates. So that means we're going to be pulling from out of state, and it's sad. It's sad. You would think that we want to brag about our public universities, and there might be some tweaks that we need to make in terms of efficiencies and structures, but we should not be driving students out of town.
What about parents who are considering where their kids should go to school, whether they're looking at Illinois or out of state? Can you blame a parent for thinking twice about maybe Illinois isn't the best place to send their student?
Absolutely not. I have the privilege of doing work in other states, and we've become a laughingstock in places like Missouri, Indiana, and the like because of our inability to come to a budget. And that uncertainty, if I was a parent, why would I subject my student to the risk that their school may close down, or they may lose critical faculty, or critical programming that's really vital to their development? So I understand why parents would take that decision and take it seriously and go elsewhere.
There are so many instabilities now, and I think when students leave home and parents are seeing their kids leave the nest for the first time, they want predictability. And so Eastern Illinois University and Western Illinois University, I'm hearing from sources, could shutter their doors. And so
could close down.
They could close down. And so I don't know that families want to take that risk.
When you're a businessman, Jimmy,
Totally.
when you look at what the credit agencies have done, they're lowering their credit rating on all these universities. What does that mean for them, and what does it mean for us as taxpayers here?
Yeah, I'll tell you this. I am a father of 2 little girls, one who is 2.5 years old, one who is 8 months old. And I am committed to the city, but long term, the question my wife and I are asking ourselves is this really the future of where we want to make our home? Given what's going on with education, given what's going on with the state, given these crises, I don't think we're going to get out of it anytime soon. So even for me, as much as I'm committed to where we're at, families like ours is going to have to find a home somewhere else for the sake of our family.
The new chancellor of City Colleges of Chicago, Juan Salgado, had this to say about the impact of the budget crisis.
I would love to see, the leaders in Springfield figure this out and figure this out soon. But we've been waiting for that to happen for some time. We can keep pushing. We can keep pushing hard, and not just to get future money, but to recover the money that we've not gotten so far. Okay, so we need to push in that direction, but at the same time, we need to plan.
And full disclosure, City Colleges of Chicago owns this television station, WYCC-TV. The point is made here about a lack of urgency in Springfield. What is the tipping point here that's going to get folks outraged enough to pressure our legislators in the Capitol?
I think you have the wrong panelists to answer that. No, the good news is that you won't find anyone who's honestly looking at this issue who thinks that we can cut our way out of it or tax our way out of it. I think the question is now, the debate is to the extent to which both are necessary. Because in the meantime, at present, it's costing taxpayers $11 million a day. Over 100,000 people and businesses have left Illinois as a result of some of this uncertainty we're discussing. And over 1 million people have lost critical services because we haven't been able to pay a lot of the organizations that are responsible for protecting our most vulnerable. So that's a lot of pressure on a daily basis, but I'm not certain if that alone clearly hasn't been enough to yield the progress we need. But it is good to see that people are more involved on the ground, but also on the higher education level to make sure something gets done sooner than later.
I'm just not sure, I'm sorry to interrupt you, how much legislative leaders and the governor care. There are protests in the Capitol every day that they're in session, and yet I'm hearing from my sources more and more that we may not see a budget until 2018.
It seems to be a developing consensus. We've been talking about this a lot, the impacts it's having, and it seems to be everyone agrees with you that we're not going to have a budget until the election.
Well, and quite honestly, I'm a Republican. I work for Republican governors. I've seen governors on both aisles wanting to find solution. I question whether the governor wants to find a solution. I question whether the governor really wants the best for the state. I run a nonprofit organization. For over 30 years, we've been funded by state grants. In the last few years, we've just decided, you know what, we can't depend on state government anymore. And if it comes, it's great, but every single education institution, nonprofit organization has to find new ways of funding themselves Otherwise, they're going to shut their doors.
In the meantime, the Obamas are back in town. Former President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle were here unveiling the new Obama Library and Museum. We have a rendering. It's a campus with 3 buildings and a museum at the center, and then a forum or a public auditorium and a library. Let's just go down the line here. Initial reactions. Todd, let's start with you.
Well, how can you be upset when you bring a $500 million jewel in the middle of the south side of Chicago, right? And anytime our president comes, it's always an honor to host a president, any president, really. But I think as it relates to the future of the south side, as long as the community remains engaged in the process, there's no way that can't produce more jobs, more local businesses, and another thing for us to be proud of on the south side of Chicago.
How about the aesthetics, Jimmy? The design, and of course this can change, but now some people have compared it to sort of a shortened or maybe a sawed-off pyramid.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I will say I was surprised by the design. I don't know if I necessarily like it.
In a good way?
Well, I don't know if I necessarily like it. How about this? I agree. I think it's going to be good for the community. I'm a big fan of any presidential libraries who are coming into town. I will say I wasn't a big fan of the design.
Carrie, how about you?
I think I really am impressed by the enclosed campus feel. I think the one problem off the bat is going to be the traffic headaches that it creates by cutting up Cornell Drive. But I love the elevated pathways and the way that you can move from one building to the other. But the design is still growing on me.
I think we can all agree. You have to credit President Obama. I mean, whereas Governor Rauner and even, our current president is not showing leadership for this country or for the state, you have to admit, he's putting $2 million of his own money into this community, into this center.
He's putting it into after-school program.
For his own program, and that's leadership for me.
One of the things that Michelle Obama said yesterday that struck me, Todd, is that she didn't want this to be the kind of place that kids were dragged to, some stuffy museum. She wanted to have a park right in the middle of it. What do you think about that particular input?
Well, it's clear that they want this to be more than just a library. They want this to be a place that's really inviting to community members, youth, adults, everyone from all backgrounds. A place to be inspired, a space where people want to be more civically engaged, a place where people want to be a catalyst to create change. So I think the president's rendering of the design aside, I think the intent really is to really revitalize Chicago from some of its most historic neighborhoods. So I'm looking forward to what that looks like.
Why is it important to get this library and museum right? Why is it important for Chicago?
Well, I think one, Chris, it's revamping an impoverished community, but 2, it's resetting the message about Chicago. And the president mentioned that yesterday, that when he talks about his hometown, the first thing to come up is gun violence.
We also have to remember this president is young. This president still has a long legacy where he's going to want to make a difference. And I think it's going to start with future leaders, and it's going to start in the south side of Chicago as well, too.
You mentioned violence, and President Obama talked about this. And in terms of the setting, of course, this is Jackson Park, but it's only a few blocks away from some of the most violent neighborhoods in the city, some of the most economically disadvantaged. Is there a sense of hope that the library itself and the business it draws will be something of an economic engine for the whole area?
Absolutely. I think there's no question that if you mentioned a $500 million investment in any community, it's definitely needed in the south side of Chicago. And this center represents that and much more. Because not only is that sort of money, but the actual name of the most popular president on the south side, I'm sure we'll ever have. So it's important to recognize that not only draws tourists, but it also draws people to communities and have more pride in their communities and more businesses and more money to communities. So it's definitely going to be a boon. I know there's concern about gentrification that may result, but I think as long as community remains engaged in the process.
What is the concern about gentrification?
Well, every neighborhood in the city, whether it be Wicker Park, Bucktown, Pilsen, they had a different character as recently as 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I think there's concern that when you have investment that's usually involves a plan that follows, that doesn't necessarily include the community that originated in that community.
My hope is, I think he also announced that he's got 2 advisory boards. One, the mayor's also creating an advisory board to help think through how the Obama Library is going to impact the community. My hope is that he'll listen to these advisors, and it's not just there for name only.
Well, and it's been a really thoughtful process from the start. I think that the choosing of the location, because there were spots in Hawaii, there were other spots around Chicago.
New York was
another one. That's right. And I believe that the foundation tried to choose the place where it felt it could do the most good.
When you look at Millennium Park, in downtown Chicago, which is now one of the most visited tourist attractions in the city. Do you see the library as kind of a mirror to that in terms of the magnitude of the attraction on the south side?
I don't see why it couldn't be. I mean, it actually should draw an entirely new population to the south side. You already have the Museum of Science and Industry. You'll have the golf course that will be expanding and bringing more people. And now you have a third. And anytime you have a multiple effect, it really helps people start to plan their trips and decide to go to Chicago just to enjoy certain things. And those can be amongst those things now, and I think it'll be a significant draw for people all over the country.
We mentioned that President Obama and Michelle Obama are donating $2 million to an after-school program. Do you think this may blunt some of the criticism that has been directed at Mr. Obama for agreeing to take $400,000 for a speech to a Wall Street conference?
I don't think it hurts. He's certainly not the only politician to come under fire for that. We heard that criticism during Hillary Clinton's campaign for president, but I think this shows that even if he is bringing a lot of money in, he's sending it out to places that matter to him.
Well, finally, a sign of the times for our digital era, and that is, while we're talking about Springfield earlier, they can't pass a budget bill, but last week the House did pass a bill requiring all elementary and middle school students to learn Cursive. It hasn't gone to the Senate yet. What do we think of this? Should elementary schools be required to teach kids how to write the old-fashioned way?
Well, this has been a topic of conversation in my newsroom quite a bit over the last few days, and I have horrible handwriting. I can't even read my own notes sometimes, so I think a lesson could have served me well, or even a refresher course. But you know, amidst a budget crisis, one of the questions is how much is this going to cost? And there's no fiscal impact to the state, according to the sponsor of the bill, who is Chris Welsh. He's from Westchester. He
just
used
those
to,
number 2 pencils.
Right, right. But it could cost school districts some money. But I did spend some time talking to retired school teachers, and they say it's really not that difficult. It's just a question of, is it useful in this day and age where kids are on electronics all the time?
Well, that is the question, right? Because we're seeing little kids with their smartphones, and they're already kind of texting much faster than I'll ever be able to do. Do we need cursive writing anymore?
You know, I have a friend who is a handwriting expert, and one of the things he was telling me is that your writing is an extension of your personality. It's an extension of who you are. And I think one of the things that he was telling me is that by kids not learning how to write in cursive and texting and using their phones, and my daughter does it as well too, you are not activating a certain sense or certain parts of your body, of your skills, motor skills, that otherwise should be used.
Yeah, and I think Illinois parents and taxpayers deserve to expect that people who go to schools in Illinois will learn how to read their grandmother's handwriting and be able to understand the founding documents of this country. I mean, if you don't learn cursive, you're functionally illiterate to those critical things. So I think it's important that HB 2977 and Representative Welch bring this, because it may sound funny when you contrast it with, you know, everyone texting, but at the end of the day, if you can't read communication, you're literally illiterate. We have to expect the basics of reading and writing when you graduate from school, and this is part of that.
That kind of ties in with the library and the museum, right? If you don't know how to write cursive, maybe you can't read some of the the love letters that Barack wrote to Michelle that could end up being in that library and museum.
The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, all of it is written in cursive. Yeah.
Some of the criticism is coming from educators who don't like another mandate. They're already dealing with Common Core, the federal mandate on education, and there are a list of things that they have to do, and they're a little concerned, some of them, that this is just one more thing they've got to follow.
Right, and that's a very valid concern. And actually, if we were to adopt this law, Illinois would be in the minority. I think only about a dozen states across the country require cursive to be taught, because as part of the Common Core standards, they don't require handwriting instruction anymore.
How would you grade yourself on your handwriting today?
You know, I've got a father and a mother who have beautiful handwriting, so they're pretty critical of mine. So I try to keep up with it, and I try to write long notes that say I love you, miss you, and all those things. So I'd probably say a B-.
Yeah, I think that was probably as close as I got to flunking out of elementary school. Thanks to our guests, Todd Belcourt, Jimmy Lee, and Carrie Lester. Have you seen those television shows that feature tiny homes, tree houses, and tricked-out campers? Well, tonight we have a story about compartmentalized living that could be coming to a neighborhood near you.
A drummer can drum just about anywhere, and a dreamer can dream just about anywhere.
And Kevin Smith is doing both, here in a vacant lot in the West Englewood neighborhood. Last year, Smith's church, Evening Star Missionary Baptist, bought this messy, tangled lot right outside its back door. So, what to do with the land? On a trip to Las Vegas, Smith had noticed the huge success of that city's downtown container park. It's a retail, restaurant, and entertainment complex made entirely out of shipping containers. When Smith got home, he remembered that the church has a long, friendly history with its next-door neighbor, a CSX railroad hub, and a light bulb went off.
We want to have an urban farm, supported by shipping containers, supported by sustainable energy.
And Smith is hoping to use those shipping containers donated by CSX to create a neighborhood fish farm and a sustainable business incubator.
We can teach the people of this community business aspects, business economics, group economics, without having so much overhead.
It is an ambitious plan with relatively cheap and readily available shipping containers as the answer.
So
Is this a giant beam?
It's an answer Mary Jo Napick found as well. She and her architect have dreamed up her first home using shipping containers to be built this summer, complete with those unmistakable grooves, intricate locking pattern on the front door.
I mentioned it to a few people, and they're just like, oh yeah, you're nuts.
Across the country, home buyers like Napick are looking for something cheaper than traditional construction and a little more eco-friendly. And they're hooked on home and garden TV shows like Tiny Homes.
This is kind of cool because you could take this thing and make it into something, just really aesthetically appealing.
For me, it's ideal. It's the kind of client you want to come into your office that's looking to do something fun and interesting.
Architect Chuck Seen insists container homes are not mobile homes, that they are not any more vulnerable to severe weather than traditional homes. But while a single container only costs about $4,000, Seen says you probably won't save as much money buying one as you think.
We've got a bunch of these.
Why? Adding the windows and doors and insulation drive up the costs. And most of the building and energy codes in the Chicago area are still far more restrictive for container homes than those in other parts of the country. But that hasn't stopped the phones from ringing off the hook at Advantage Structures on the south side.
People like to mimic what they see on television, and so they come to us and say, hey, I saw this on TV, can you guys do that?
They can and do, says sales manager Wendell Neely. The company's Lego-like design of a model container home is attracting folks right off the street.
This structure, as we see it, this is what they call two 40-foot high cube containers. The center walls have been removed.
And Neely says businesses around Chicago are already jumping on board. Clark Street Sports across from Wrigley Field was put together by Advantage Structures. It's built out of 8 containers now, with dozens more yet to be added in an expanding complex.
The doors, we're actually going to slice them right off the end of the container with the frame on them.
And it's a trend that could grow, as long as home buyers like Mary Jo Napick and dreamers like Kevin Smith keep thinking inside the box. Well, that concludes this week's show. You are now in the loop. To learn more about our program, log onto our website, wycc.org, and link to In the Loop. Until next week, I'm Chris Bury. Good night.